happy to have two esteemed experts in the room to talk more about these topics for which we ourselves are not remotely experts. So having come all the way from the San Juan Islands in the Pacific Northwest, we have Dr. Nancy Maryboy, who's a Navajo and Cherokee astronomer. She's also president and founder of the Indigenous Education Institute. Dr. Maryboy teaches Indigenous astronomy at Northern Arizona University, and in partnership with Dr. David Begay, a scholar and member of the Navajo Nation, she has co-authored books, developed planetarium shows, and produced online courses on Native American astronomy. In addition to this work, Dr. Maryboy works with NASA educational outreach projects and with the University of California, Berkeley Space Science Labs on National Science Foundation funded projects, which include Cosmic Serpent, Bridging Native Ways of Knowing in Western Science and Museum Settings, Native Universe, Indigenous Voice in Science Museums, and Indigenous Worldviews in Informal Science Education, IWISE, which is where I had the privilege of first meeting Dr. Maryboy a couple of years ago in DC. She is also co-PI for Navajo Sky, a NASA project which has developed digital modules for planetariums juxtaposing Navajo and Western astronomy. And we know nearly 100 people on our campus today premiered that planetarium show in a portable planetarium we had set up on campus in cooperation with the Asheville Museum of Science. So we're really happy for that partnership in this special event. We also have Dr. Barbara Duncan, who we're happy to call one of our own faculty here at UNCA. So Dr. Duncan is an education director at the Museum of the Cherokee Indian, and adjunct assistant professor of modern languages and literatures here at UNCA, where she teaches the Cherokee language. Dr. Duncan received her PhD in folklore and folk life from the University of Pennsylvania in 1982, and she's lived in Southern Appalachia since 1983. She's a folklorist, poet, and songwriter, and she has written and edited award-winning books about Cherokee history and culture, including Origin of the Milky Way and Living Stories of the Cherokee. Dr. Duncan is a partner in Your Grandmother's Cherokee, which is a project with a dictionary and instruction in the Cherokee language. And recently, the North Carolina Folklore Society awarded her the Brown Hudson Award for contributions to North Carolina folklore studies. So I'd like to welcome you both. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, OCO and Yate to you, speaking on both of my heritage sides, Navajo and Cherokee. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it was so wonderful to wake up 2 mornings ago and see the hills here, and I feel right at home. Most of my time in North Carolina I've spent up at Cherokee, but I've really been in the Asheville airport a lot, and it's just a pleasure to have some time in Asheville. So like Britt said, I'm currently living in the San Juan Islands. I have a lot of family up there, but I have a lot of family down on the Navajo Nation too. And so what I want to talk to you about today is Navajo astronomy and kind of a lifetime of studying Navajo astronomy and how different it really is from Western astronomy. I work with wonderful people, and we call ourselves a team, and some are from UC Berkeley, some are from Navajo Nation, some are from Cherokee, so I slip into saying we a lot. I just wanted you to know what I mean when I say we. Some are from Laguna Pueblo, and we run a lot of conferences, professional development. We're funded by NASA, and we're funded by National Science Foundation. Right currently, we're funded by NASA in something called the Heliophysics Education Consortium. It's about 40 different institutions, and we're doing a lot of outreach to Navajo Nation schools. Navajos, like many other tribes, have a very rich and complex astronomy, and it's built on the language. And the language is an important key to understanding this. What any astronomies in the Indigenous world are going to contain. So about maybe in the early 90s, I started studying this with my research partner, David Begay. And it was interesting. We both come from families of medicine people. He's a medicine man, and my brother's the president of the Hatakli, which is the group of Navajo medicine men, so he's the president of that. And so everything we did, everything I will tell you tonight has been validated and approved to be talked about outside of the Navajo Nation. We're really cautious about that because in many tribes, including Navajo, the study of the astronomy is very special. It's very, it's sacred. And so for a women don't usually study astronomy in Navajo. But if you are a woman, you'll have certain ceremonies done for you to enable you to study it. It's because it's dangerous. It's considered a topic that can harm you if you don't take proper precautions. So there's a lot that we have studied that we don't talk about outside of Navajo. But we did this for the children, for the students, so they could grow up knowing they had a rich and complex and wonderful foundation of Navajo astronomy. That being said, there's probably only 1 out of 10 or maybe 1 out of 100 Navajos that even know they have an astronomy, because this was really endangered and being lost. And when we started back in the early 90s, there were some absolutely wonderful elders alive, and we went to them and we learned from them. But I would say, maybe with 1 or 2 exceptions, they're all gone now. So now we are the elders, and so we, the way we learned was very interesting. There's no book we could really trust or validate that you could buy in a library. So we went to the people. We went to our own families, and I particularly went to my mom's side of the family, because women learn from their mothers, and they learn a lot about the moon, for example. Men learn from the dads and uncles, and they mostly learn in the sweat lodges. And so what David and I did is we learned from our families, and then we put it together into one. And when we wrote our dissertation for our PhD, and it was in Indigenous astronomy, and Indigenous science was the overall focus, we had to fight like crazy to do a collaborative dissertation. But that's the way we had done all our research. And we said, if I just write one, it's just going to be the women's side. If he writes one, it's just going to be the men's side. So apparently we wrote a compelling enough proposal that we were allowed to write a collaborative dissertation. And I'll tell you, we never disagreed on anything. We really, the real book would have been Conversations with Nancy and David, which stretched over about 7 years. And he's such a fluent speaker. I'm not nearly as fluent a speaker. And so we just discussed and talked, and we had a process model, a cosmic model we were following, so we always knew where we were going. And this mirrored our astronomy research. So there were a couple of ways we went about it. One is we went to elders, of course, but an elder won't tell you, you can't ask a question about Navajo astronomy. What you have to do is present what you think is right, and they'll tell you if it's right or wrong. And often it was in the middle of a ceremony. We'd go to all these ceremonies, and he was becoming a medicine person anyway. And maybe about 3 o'clock, 3 a.m., the medicine man would turn to you and say, now, what was it you wanted to know? And if they did that, then we could actually ask a question. So David did a lot of this in ceremonies. I did some of it too. And that's how we learned. And they always will ask you, why do you want to know it? And you better have a good answer for that, or else you're not gonna get an answer. The best answer we had was we wanted to pass down to young Navajos so they can become aware of their own astronomy. And so mostly that worked for us. Another thing we did was hundreds and hundreds of mornings getting up before dawn, because all the times in Navajo that are really significant happened before the dawn. And English has a dawn, but Navajo has levels and levels of pre-dawn. In fact, we knew one medicine man that was going to teach us 49 levels of dawn, and then he was killed in an automobile accident, and there's nobody else that knows that anymore. But that's how precise this language and the knowledge was. And so we would get up in that pre-dawn hour where you couldn't, it was all dark, and then you'd see that one little red line, you know, coming across the horizon. We did most of our research down in Saline, Arizona, which is in the middle of the Navajo Nation, and we were both professors and administrators in our tribal college, Dene College, and I actually went there too and graduated. One of my degrees down there was in Navajo language, which is why I love to talk to Barbara about Cherokee language too. Anyway, so we'd get up and we'd have to watch for certain stars coming up, and so everything, like I say, significant, the significators were in the east. What could you see before Dahitan, which is the first day of after the new moon in English, and then Hanibaz, which is the full moon? It has to be between that 2-week period. It has to come up from the east, and the stars we were looking for started in the end of September, which is the beginning of Navajo, arguably the beginning of Navajo, a new year. And because there's a lot of clans and there's a lot of Navajos, there's not total agreement on all these things. Each clan has their own stories and their own way of learning knowledge. And so we have to respect all of them. And there's differences in the Navajo way it's spoken across the reservation. So anyway, we respect all of those. And so we watch, and sometimes it would be cloudy or foggy, or you wouldn't see the stars. We were trying to find, at one point, a very significant coyote star. I can tell you now, it's called Canopus, but I couldn't have told you that 15 years ago. And that star, everybody that ran a planetarium told us, you can't see that from Navajo land. It's impossible. That story is false. But we knew we could see it because we could look over the canyon of Canyon de Chelly, and we could see it at a certain time of the year. And one of those times is just a few weeks ago. And it has the tiniest little cycle. It comes up, it goes about this far, and it goes down. But it's very significant in Navajo for different ceremonies, and it's the coyote star. He picked that, the Ma'i, the coyote, picked that star and said, that's my star. And so it translates into the monthless star because he didn't have a whole month for his star. He just had like a week for it to come up and go back down. So we challenged this guy that was running the Hansen Planetarium in Salt Lake, and he let us come up and run skies back and forth, and he kept saying, no, you'll never see Canopus. So we asked him to come down, and we took him out, early, I think it was in the evening at that point. No, it was early in the morning, and he said, oh my gosh, you're right. We knew we were right because we could see it. But that's what I mean. You had to be on the spot, and part of Navajo is in canyons, part of it's on mountains, so it all kind of just depended on where you were. Another one we found in an interesting way was we had a star map we were able to access. And this star map was made by a man in English, he'd be called Hastine, a man with a cane. And his knowledge came from before the Long Walk, when the Navajos were removed, just like the Cherokees were removed. Navajos were removed and sent to a prison-like place called Fort Sumner in New Mexico. Well, his knowledge came before that, and he was an old man by the end of the 1800s. And one of the priests that came out to work with Navajos learned Navajo and got to be quite friendly with this man. And he had the star map drawn in the sand. And to make you imagine how important this is and how complex, he drew in the sand a map of the whole, both the eastern and the western horizon, the north and the south. He made it two-dimensional. He made it three-dimensional, and he gave it movement, because if you put in Venus or you put in the Pleiades, it's going to be in different places at different times of the year. So to imagine the knowledge he carried, to put that in sand, is amazing. Other people have seen this, and they've wondered, they couldn't make sense of the map, but we made it our business to study this map for like 20 years. And I just want to tell you how we did it, because it's pretty fascinating. The priest had learned Navajo, and he put a lot of the Navajo words in what he wrote. But we had the language, and so it was written in an old Navajo with old orthography, which those of you who are linguists will know what I mean. It's really a Russian language. It's nothing like Navajo today with English letters. So I had to learn to read it, and I had to learn to pronounce it absolutely perfectly. And then David, who knew the high ceremonial language of the Navajo, he took what I was hoping to say perfectly, and he could put it into the high ceremonial language of the Navajo. And then he had to put it into the everyday Navajo. And then we had to put it into a literal kind of English. And most, if you look at translations of indigenous languages, most of them are, if you can get to the literal translation, not the everyday English, that's where most of the meaning resides in English. So we went down to that level, and then we had to put it in everyday English so people would understand it. Every step of that way, we lost more of the holistic significance of the original meaning. But because we were able to go back to that original meaning, and it did take two minds going together, otherwise you couldn't have done this, we were able to access a lot of meaning. And we have identified now almost everything on that star map. So, but it's taken a whole lifetime. So this is kind of how we did it. We also worked with technology, we worked with computers, we did starry skies, and we didn't use stellarium as much because at that time you couldn't go back in time with stellarium, but now you can. So we did a lot of starry sky things. The Hawaiians did this too, the Lakota did this too, and both of those tribes were able to show that they'd been on their land for thousands of years, which a lot of anthropologists said, oh no, you're just newcomers. But because they had stories of the stars and what was there thousands of years ago and could match them up with things like starry skies, they were able to prove it. So it's really great if you're studying migrations. And in Navajo, it's an Athabascan language, and it's related to like Tlingit and some of those Haida. And I can't find any relationships between the words because this is thousands of years ago. But then you get into Alaska and parts of Canada where they speak a Dene language, and Navajo is called the Dine language, and they're very related. And so we were able to go up and talk to elders a long time ago. They're all gone too. But like the North Star in Navajo is Nankos, and we'd go up and we'd say that to them, and they knew that word. So that was way before Navajos ever migrated down into what's now the United States. They had those words. And we used to talk to them about sweat lodge songs and words, and those words are old words, like the word for ice and water and wood and all the origin stories that have to do with how the sweat lodge was built. It's in those words. So we were able, and then we went down to Sarcee, which is just in British Columbia, and they had some words that they had absorbed from the Plains tribes, and so we went down to Hoopa, and they had words for the Pleiades that, and so we were able to actually trace migration patterns through the words, the names of the stars, and what implications that had for living, being attached to a land. So it's been a fascinating journey. And so the way we ended up working with NASA is we had a space grant, and we had about 20 paintings done of different Navajo constellations, maybe 25. And we worked very closely with a Navajo sheep herder who happened to be a really good artist. He was a student at the time. And so he painted pictures, and we told him every detail to paint. And that's how you'll see, if you see our book or our planetarium show, you'll see those images. And so that's what we did for the images. And then NASA heard about us, and I'll just quickly tell you that story. There was a time when, some years back, when one of the Navajo scientists, not Navajo, I'm sorry, NASA scientist died, and his big wish was to be buried on the moon, his ashes. This was Shoemaker was his name. And so he, sure enough, there was a mission to the moon, and they put his ashes in it and went up there, and then it pierced the crust of the moon. So that's really significant too. And so when Navajos heard about this, they were absolutely horrified. And so this one medicine man got a hold of the president of the Navajo Nation, and he said, "Look what's happening. They're putting ashes of the dead up on the moon, our purest relative up in the sky. And not only that, they pierced the crust of the moon." And so these are huge no-nos in Navajo, because death and dead people are over here, and the living people are over here, and they don't mix. And so the president of Navajo Nation sent a letter to the head of NASA, and he forwarded it on to the president of the United States. And the president of the United States got back to him and said, "You better do something with your relations with the Navajo, because this is not," I don't remember who the president was at this time, "but this is not acceptable." So then they were looking around NASA, was, well, who could we even talk to? And so our name came up, because at the time we were the only people doing this work at all. And almost the same thing today, we're almost the only ones. And so they got a hold of us, and what they really liked about our work is we tied it to patterns and cycles and things that are really in the sky. It was stories, yes, and stories are the most wonderful way to pass knowledge down, but it also tied, because of our astronomy, it tied to all these places in the sky. That's the connection I'd love to make with Cherokee, because the stories are still there, but the connections of what's what, a lot of them are missing. Anyway, so that's how we got connected with NASA, and they liked what we were doing. They've been funding us in a really nice way ever since, and they have a mission to work with underserved minorities, and particularly Native Americans. So that's why I wear this other hat sometime of NASA. So I'm going to stop talking now and give this to Barbara, and thank you for the time to share that with you.
Well, I just want to say Shio, and I'm happy to be here to see all of you. I am honored to be sharing the program with Dr. Nancy Maryboy, who I've known for a number of years, and have always been so impressed with your work. And I'm sitting over here and saying, wow. And I just think what she has done is so exceptional in all these years, in particular in combining science and indigenous perspectives. I just want to say just a minute, just a quick thing about that, because over the years, as I've worked with teachers and in different programs, sometimes teachers will try to they'll try to match up math and Cherokee culture by doing a geometry project on a basket pattern, or a science project where they'll look at how arrowheads work or something. But that's just kind of like scratching the surface. And the work that Nancy and her colleagues have done is really looking at indigenous knowledge with respect, looking at indigenous knowledge as its own system that's equally as valid as Western science. And I just think that is so important. So I really appreciate what you do. I had a list of a couple questions here, and I can't remember what they are, so I just got totally entranced with thinking about the Navajo skies. And so I think Britt had a couple of questions for me here. And one was about the solar eclipse this year. How many of you saw the solar eclipse here in western North Carolina? For how many of you was that your first solar eclipse? Yeah, me too. I saw a partial one a number of years ago, and I didn't really know it was coming. I wasn't really impressed with it, and I was at my house at the time, and it was at lunchtime, and I kind of wandered out on the deck, and all of a sudden I realized that the shadows all had these like crescent-shaped shadows around them. I was like, what is going on? And then realized it was the partial solar eclipse happening. So this was much more dramatic this time, right? It's like total. And so in Cherokee, people began preparing for this and looking at what the legends and stories were, because, as you say, a lot of this knowledge is still encapsulated in the stories and the myths and legends. So the Cherokee story about the eclipse, the big story, is that the frog is swallowing the sun. And when you see an eclipse, whether it's a lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse, the first thing you see is like that little rounded shape, right? The rounded shadow against the other big circle. And for us human beings, that's the shape like when we take a bite out of a cookie, right? So cultures around the world have said, something is eating the sun. So for the Chinese, it's a dragon. In India, it's the head of a demon. In other cultures, in Northern Europe, in the Scandinavian cultures, it is the sky wolf that is chasing the sun across the sky. And for Cherokee culture, it's the frog. Now you might say, why a frog? A frog doesn't seem very cosmic or giant or threatening. But to understand this, and so one of my anthropology colleagues is here tonight, Dylan, and as you know, usually in cultures, everything makes sense. There's a reason for everything. And I think it's important to look at that big picture of patterns of culture instead of just looking at one interesting little story or one kind of quaint fact. And so if you look at the Cherokee cosmology, from the legends, from petroglyphs, from other evidence, there is kind of this division between the lower world and the upper world. And of course the upper world is the sky where the moon and sun and stars are, the lightning and thunder. The middle world is where we're walking around, Eladi, we're walking around here on the earth. And the lower world is below. And it's the world where the springs come out of, like the springs of water that come out of the ground. And there are a lot of myths and legends about this world being a place that you can go to kind of as an alternative universe. And so I wish that Bo Carroll was with us here tonight. We invited Bo Carroll, who's a member of the Eastern Band, and he has spoken very eloquently about how the Cherokee cosmology is divided. But he is defending his thesis over in Knoxville, so that took precedence. But Bo has looked into this both with the legends and with the archaeology. He works for the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. And in East Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, other places in the original Cherokee territory, there are limestone caves, a lot of caves. And in these caves, it turns out, we know this because of the research of people like David Dye and Jan Simek, every cave in the southeast has been explored up to 12 miles in and 2 miles down. And as the Cherokees went into these caves over millennia, they left artwork, they left artifacts, and they explored this world, and they had a whole kind of symbology of pictographs that they used in the caves. It turns out, as these researchers, including Bo Carroll, have looked at petroglyphs and artifacts above ground, there is a corresponding world of symbols above ground that mirrors the underground symbols. So, in all of this, there are certain animals, of course, the birds are associated with the upper world, the ones who fly. And the animals associated with the underworld are the reptiles, amphibians, snakes, frogs, salamanders. And so it makes a perfect kind of poetic or indigenous kind of sense that if something in the upper world is being threatened, it's going to be threatened by something from the lower world, which in the Cherokee story is the frog. So in this legend, when the frog begins to eat the sun, it is the job of the people, because it's always the job of the people to maintain balance, the responsibility of human beings to be in balance and to try to maintain balance. So the job of human beings is to make noise and scare away the giant frog. And so this is what Cherokee people have done over millennia, and it has worked every time. And so when the tribe was planning a celebration for this year, they wanted to do some cultural activities with dancing and crafts, storytelling, and music and different things. And so, and with the idea that at the moment of the eclipse, people would make noise and frighten away the giant frog. And so the t-shirt, if you came to the event and got a t-shirt, your t-shirt says, "I watched the frog swallow the sun in Cherokee, North Carolina." And So this was really kind of a wonderful community celebration, and you know, a lot of Cherokee people didn't know that story. I mean, we think that the last total eclipse right here in this spot, of course the original Cherokee territory is much bigger from Atlanta up into West Virginia and so on. But the last eclipse right here was probably around 1500, is that right? Yeah, we talked about that in our workshop. I think there's another story. As we were, Dr. Maryboy and her colleague, Dr. Laura Petticolas from Berkeley, came out to Cherokee and did a workshop earlier this year. And we were talking, and Juan was there, and we were talking about other Cherokee stories. Britt was there. And I'm trying to think, well, is there another Cherokee story about an eclipse? And the only story I could think of was the story of the origin of the redbird, in which there is a point at which the sun goes dark. And it's a long story, and I won't take the time to tell the whole story here, but it's a long story. It's about the origin of the redbird. The daughter of the sun, at the end of the story, turns into the redbird, the cardinal. And that's the origin of cardinals in Cherokee mythology. Well, as we were discussing this in our meeting earlier this year, one of the people who had seen total eclipses numbers of times said, you know, at the moment of totality, these red prominences flare out from the sun, and they are the brightest red you have ever seen in your life. He said photographs and films just can't capture them. And I thought, well, there it is. In this Cherokee story, they were encoding this knowledge, because when you have an oral culture, the way that things get remembered is through stories. And in stories, things happen in a symbolic and a poetic kind of way that's not always direct information. Because if you tell people, you probably know this from you students from taking classes, if you have a whole long list of things to memorize, it's hard to memorize them. But if you can make them into some kind of story or an acronym, you can remember there's kind of a story that goes with it. So this is how so much knowledge has been encapsulated and passed down. So it's been really wonderful to work with the Cherokee community this year, to have Dr. Nancy and Dr. Laura come out and talk with us and work with us. It's been really interesting.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
So since Cherokee made a lot of noise during the eclipse in the stories to scare the frog away so he wouldn't swallow the moon, what happened in Cherokee, North Carolina during the eclipse?
Well, people made noise. There was this big celebration at the fairgrounds, right? People were telling stories, and Warriors of Montego danced, and at that moment, people made noise. Yeah. Right up the road at the Oconaluftee Visitor Center of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, they had a quiet viewing area. And I was so if you could take your pick of which way you wanted to go. But I was really struck by your account of Navajo tradition of what to do during an eclipse. Would you share that?
Yeah. So in Navajo, this was awkward for me, because in Navajo.
Microphone.
Oh yeah, this was a little awkward for me, because in Navajo, you're absolutely supposed to stay inside during the eclipse. It's a time. It's a very special time, and traditionally you would stay in the hogan with your family, and you wouldn't eat or drink during the whole time of the eclipse. You'd sing some songs, and you'd stay very reverent. So, because this was the biggest event NASA was having in many years, you know, we got very involved with it, and I so much fun going out to Cherokee and a meeting with you, and she called some wonderful people together, including Juan and Britt, and so then I got to go to Wyoming for a week and travel around with somebody from Google and somebody from the Space Science Labs in California. Here's a little aside. The kids were so impressed to have, we went to a lot of schools, the kids were so impressed to have someone there from Google. This made a huge difference to them. And I would see these long lines coming up, and it wasn't to see me, it wasn't to see Darlene, it was to shake hands with Calvin Johnson from Google. And these little boys would be going like this and cleaning their hand off, and then, you know, it was really cute. And Calvin is just a wonderful guy. So we went all across Wyoming, doing basically that same kind of town hall that Laura and Chris did with you. And it was really, really fun. And then I went to some other tribes. And then the big dilemma for the Navajo Nation is there's a lot of people that are Christian or Pentecostal or Catholic or Mormon or traditional. There's all different religions. And so it was only the traditional ones that weren't supposed to view the eclipse. And we did a movie on it, and if you want to see it, it's only 7 minutes long, and I think Juan or Britt can give you it's on YouTube, they can give it to you, and you'll hear a Navajo elderly medicine man and his daughter, who's his apprentice, talking about Navajo protocol. You'll see the story of the frog trying to swallow the moon, and Ray Boney from Cherokee Nation. He did all the animations for it, and it's in Cherokee language with English translation. And then we had a Sundance leader from Wyoming, Wind River, who is Northern Arapaho, and my niece is married into that family. So he spoke, and he was so excited when he saw the results. They said he was just ecstatic, so that made me feel really good. But so in Navajo, you don't look at the eclipse, you go inside. And so being, both tribes, it was a real dilemma for me. So I talked to my sister, and she said, well, remember what Mom said? You follow, there are certain protocols you follow at different times, depending on what tribe you are. So anyway, it turned out that I actually could look at the sun, so I saw the eclipse. So what I wanted to share with you tonight is this medallion. This is one that my sister made. She's a beautiful bead worker, and the beads are so tiny I can't even see them with my own eyes. They're just exquisite. And so I said to her, "Can you make me something for the eclipse?" And I never heard a word back from her about it. We didn't talk about it. And all of a sudden, a week before the eclipse, this arrived in the mail, and I called her. I was very excited, but she said she had a hard time deciding what she was going to put for the corona, the yellow and the red. And I think she did. I don't know if you can see it back there, but I think she did a wonderful job. So I've been wearing it ever since. So anyway, that's a difference. Navajo, they don't look at an eclipse. Other tribes, like the Northern Arapaho Sundance leader said, we do look at the eclipse. We look at it very positively, and we look at it at a time when you can see into the future what's going to happen with the tribe. And then another one he said was his tribe knows how to predict eclipses. A lot of people like to say, well, Native people didn't know how to do this, but Arapahoes did know, and I've heard that Navajos might have known too, but I can't affirm that. But he did, and then he said, I'm one of those that can predict eclipses. And so he talks about knowing the opposition of the sun and the moon and these different cycles that they travel in. So yeah, it was really interesting. We went to Idaho for the eclipse, and there were 9 of us, and there was this big mountain in front of us. So what I didn't get to see was what a colleague of mine got to see, where there's a time, I don't know if any of you saw it in a flat place, and being from North Carolina, I kind of think you didn't, and we didn't either, but there'll be you'll see the sunset, the sun setting all around the horizon if you're in a flat place to see all the horizons, and it's all different colors. So I didn't get to see it either, but I'm going to think about that for next time. There's going to be an annular eclipse down in the Navajo land area in 2023, and there's going to be another total eclipse in 2024, I think it is, but it won't come here this time. It has another trajectory. But if you haven't seen one, it's just absolutely stunning. And what I came away with was how it pulled people together all over. We stop at a rest stop, and people were so nice, and they were all talking together. And we'd go to Wyoming, and there'd be somebody with totally a different political attitude than yours, and everybody was trying to come together. There was this amazing feeling. This is a cosmic event. It's way bigger than any of us, and we're living through it. And that was what I came away with, that wonderful feeling.
I came away with something different. As we were talking in the workshop earlier this year, somebody said, well, you know, the reason we can see an eclipse is because as we look at the sky, the sun and the moon are exactly the same size. And I suddenly realized how much I was influenced by my irrational superstitions that I learned in my younger days in science class, which were that the sun is a giant ball of gas, right? It's humongous. It dwarfs the size of the earth, and those pictures of like the earth is like this and the sun's like this. And the moon is very small. That's what I had in my head. The sun is big, the moon is small. This is from science class, right? This is what we are taught to believe. And so I never really thought about what they actually looked like in the sky. But when whoever it was said that in the workshop, I thought, well, of course that's true. And that's why in Cherokee, the word for sun and moon is the same word. They're equal sizes as you look at them with your naked eye. And they are distinguished by the one that lives in the daytime and the one that lives in the nighttime. So they're both called Nundo, and it's Nundo Iga Ehi, or Nundo Shanohi Ehi. Nunda that lives in the daytime, Nunda that lives in the nighttime. And so they observed that quite correctly. And I understand there are a number of other tribes that have the same way of describing the sun and the moon. It's the same word, distinguished by the one that lives in the day, the one that lives at night. Also in Cherokee language, there is one word for shining. It is shining. But it's only to be used with the sun, moon, and stars. Anything else that's shining is reflected. Talugi'a. The light is reflected from something. So if you see like the light on the water or other kinds of light, then it's the talugi'a, it's the reflected light.
That's interesting. So in Navajo, there is something similar. So the sun is Johanae and the moon is Tlehanae. And so one is talking about the night and one's talking about the day. However, it's also implying that it's a sun carrier. It's not really the sun. It's a being on a horse. And there's stories about this, a being on a horse. And the sun is turquoise. It's carrying, that being is carrying a perfect round disc of turquoise. And then the moon one is carrying a perfect round disc of white shell. And so that brought me back to thinking about Apollo in Greek mythology, that, you know, he was carrying, he was in a, you know, he was, what would you call that thing? He was riding in a chariot, and he was carrying the sun. So there's other tribal stories and non-tribal stories that have to do with a sun bearer or a sun carrier, and it really intrigues me where that would have come from, that knowledge that the sun wasn't in charge of its own motion, that it had to have somebody carrying it or riding with it. And I'll pose it all to you as a question. I don't know exactly how that knowledge came about, but it's interesting that it's Navajo and Greek. And the thing about shining reminds me, we used to do a lot of our research down by a lake called Saley Lake, and there were mountains right near there. And so one of the things I loved to do at that time was look, you know, oh, the moon on the lake is so beautiful, you know, and then I'm always getting slapped, like, you know, Navajos aren't supposed to look at the moon on the water. It's dangerous. So then that was kind of too bad at the end of my looking at the water. Another one of them, there's a lot of do's and don'ts. Another one is you don't go into the Anasazi caves. And I used to love to do that, but then a medicine man in a ceremony gave me this piercing look, and he said, you know, you're not supposed to go in those caves, you're Navajo. And he said, you know, they like you so well, they want you to stay there with them. And then he gave me a real deep look. He said, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? And immediately I imagined falling off a cliff because the caves are way up high. And so, yeah, I said, yes, I do know. And so, but you know, once he told me that, I never had any interest again into going into any of them. I love studying about it and all, but I actually didn't go in after that. And the area that we're from has a lot of Anasazi ancestral Puebloan ruins, so it's gorgeous. But it's interesting, there's a lot of protocol, and a lot of it's based on respect for the knowledge of the ancient ones, and respect for the traditional knowledge of who was on that land before. All of this is, we've been talking about respect, so I have with some of you today, and the respect and the honoring of this kind of knowledge, this sort of sacred sky knowledge, and keeping it pure and holy. And so I run into conflicts working with NASA, because NASA's doing a lot now about going to Mars. But the way we're looking at that is it's another exploration, and hopefully it won't be damaging the surface of the planet. But yes, even us, we have to sort of double think what we do and what we let out, and how we explain our relationship with NASA in a good and positive way. And I have to say that kids using astronomy, if you're a teacher of grade school kids at all, using astronomy is a wonderful way to reach them, because there's so much interest in space travel, Star Trek, all this kind of thing. They perk up and listen when you're talking about space travel and astronomy, so it's relevant to them, and then you can tie on other facts. And what we do is we have this passionate belief that if you can learn your own astronomy first, and then you can layer Western astronomy on top of that, and then you can kind of deconstruct it, which part is Western, which part is Indigenous. And it gives you a really clear way. It's kind of like if you have a pair of 3D glasses on and you cover up one eye, you just see, two-dimensional. But if you have both eyes open, you see three-dimensional. And that's kind of the point we're trying to get across to Navajo schools, that if they teach their students their own astronomy first, that's how we learned. We never got anywhere with Western astronomy. It was very confusing, but once we knew the Navajo astronomy, where things were in the sky, how they related, it's all about their movements and the relationships they have to each other. Once we knew that, it was really easy to just take in all we could about Western astronomy, and everything we learned, enlarged our knowledge and our scope of thinking more. So I think when Westerners do astronomy, there's a lot of, I know of this wonderful woman, she's Argentinian, a strong astrophysicist, and she got into that because she was so passionate about looking at the skies. But she said, now here I am with all these big telescopes between me, but what always grounds her is going out and just looking up. That's what that's what it does, it grounds her. So.
I wonder if there are Navajo places specifically to go look at the sky. Because in Cherokee, for years I have looked at the towns and the different places, and through the Cherokee Heritage Trails Project, and just because I was interested. But all the Cherokee town places in the mountains, where all the towns are now, that's where Cherokee towns were. So Swannanoa, Asheville, Waynesville, Franklin, Bethel, Bryson City, Cherokee. I mean, every place there is a town now, that was a Cherokee town. And all of these towns have one thing in common. Well, there's a number of things in common. It's almost like a blueprint. But they all have a 360-degree view of the horizon. And if you lived here in the mountains long, you know that is not common. Most places I have lived, my houses have not ever had a 360-degree view of the horizon. And I think that was important to them. Some of the older people have said it was important to watch where the sun came up and went down, because that was like our life. When we're young, that's like when the sun is coming up in the morning. And as our life goes on, we're kind of like the sun going across the sky during the day. And as we get older, we're getting closer to the west. We're going to go down. We're going to go out of sight. And there are some other places in the old Cherokee country that seem to be made just for looking at the sky. So down in Fort Mountain, Georgia, have any of you ever been to the Cohutta Wilderness area or Fort Mountain around above Chatsworth, Georgia? There is a, up on the top of the mountain there, this is where the Appalachians come down. It's kind of not far from the southern end of the Appalachian Trail. But the Appalachians come down and then just drop off onto the Piedmont of Georgia. And at the very end where it drops off, at the top of that mountain, there is an 825-foot long stone wall that was originally 6 feet high. And it is aligned exactly east to west. And it is not, so it's called Fort Mountain. It's a state park, and it's called Fort Mountain. And there are all these stories about it. It was a fortification, or it was built by the Welsh Prince Madoc, as if Cherokee people didn't have the sense to pile 2 stones on top of each other. A white person had to do that. But I'm speaking sarcastically. But it's amazing, and you go up there, it was not defensive, because you can just walk around the end of it, or you can just come out the other side of the mountain. It was not defensive in any way. And it had these little circular, 6 foot in diameter, circular rooms kind of coming off of it at regular intervals that were, we don't know. So now the Georgia legend is, of course, they were honeymoon suites, and this was, fertility rites were performed there. So that was, good for the tourist trade, I guess. But I think that the location on that mountain, again, the really clear view of the horizon, unobstructed view of the horizon, and the east-west alignment all argue that that was a place to observe the skies. And then it was a huge stonework. I mean, it's a lot of stones. I think there's so much that we don't know, things that are undiscovered in the Cherokee Territory. There are a lot of rocks with markings, like Jeticola Rock near Cullowhee. Has anyone been to Jeticola Rock or seen those markings? It is not the only one. These exist in almost every North Carolina county. A lot of them are on private land. Some of them have been defaced. Some of them have been covered over or broken up. But I think there was just so much knowledge here that we don't know about at this point in time.
In Navajo, it's really important. Navajo, it's really important to know where the light first hits, and it's embedded in the language. And so all of the cardinal directions are really important. And some tribes, it's the cross cardinal directions in between, like north and south, but Navajo, it's the cardinal directions. And the Hogan is built that way according to the doorway always has to be to the east where the sun comes up, and that's ha-ah-ah, where the sun comes up. And then it goes around, and the south is they're all color coordinated too. So the east is always white, and each one of the directions is really significant. So when you build a hogan, each one of the directions will have certain big minerals or beads under that one post, and so it's carried out in all ways of building the traditional home. And then the words, like I said, they all have to do with the sun, except for north, which is has to do with the darkness. It's a black color. It has to do with darkness, but all the rest of them have to do with where the sun is in the sky. And so Hawaiian is somewhat similar. It's where they have their heiaus, their temples, often will be where the first light of the sun hits on a particular island. And then that's kind of like Navajo, where people would always come up and say, where does the first light hit on that mountain? And then in Navajo, the way you pray or you sing, it always acknowledges that relationship with Mother Earth and Father Sky. And it's the only time that Mother Earth comes first, because usually the male comes first, but this is like Mother Earth and Father Sky, and you start it with, your feet, and it's where the sun first would hit your, it's either where the sun first hits your head or it goes down and hits your feet. So even where you stand and the way you pray and the way you look at the world has to do with where the sun is hitting you. So I too think that the sun is really significant. And then another cool thing that happens out where we are is in the third week in January, the Milky Way. It's, you know, if you go out and look at the Milky Way, like tonight, it's going to be going either this way or this way tonight. And if you go out at early dawn, it's going to be the opposite. So the way that Navajos would illustrate the Milky Way in like rugs, you know, rugs or sand paintings, it was really clever how they did it. It was like a crosshatch going down to show that they went this way first and then this way, and this way, and this way. In the Navajo stories, they talk about the Milky Way lying all around the horizon. And it's really true, we found out. It's like January 23rd, that week around there. You can go out on Navajo land if you can see all the horizons, and you'll see that the sun the Milky Way is lying all around the horizon. It's really amazing. And there again, this is one of the problems we had working with astronomers. We didn't know when we started out that there's planetary astronomers, there's people that just study the moon, that just study the stars, the astrophysicists that just study, you know, way out there. And we were always asking the wrong questions to the wrong, I wish we'd known Brett. We were always asking the wrong questions at the wrong time to the wrong people. So we'd ask somebody something about the moon, and they couldn't understand it, and they couldn't answer it. And we thought, oh my gosh, they're an astronomer. Why don't they get it, you know? But we didn't get it because we were always asking, you know, not the lunar specialist, but maybe an astrophysicist something about the moon. So we learned, it took a lot of trial and error. We finally learned who to ask which questions. But nobody that we found knew about the Milky Way encircling the horizon. And so we started asking astronomers that we knew, and then they go, oh my gosh, you can see it on starry skies. That's how important technology was to us, to find these things and then see them in the computer and then go out and find them. So yeah, and I really think what you're saying is important about that 360-degree view, and I think what Tom Belt does with telling stories of all the layers of the mountains from the Cotulla Mountains is so interesting. It's so place-based, these astronomies are. So do you have any, are we done, or do you have any questions?
Well, this has been totally mesmerizing. I wish we could talk for a couple more hours, but I think we should, we have about 15 more minutes, and I wanted to open up to questions from the audience, if anyone had a burning question.
Hi, I just, specifically for the Navajo people, I wanted to know, you said that you can't look at the moon in the water, so like, it's the reflection, and is it by any chance like, more, like, is it worse for a female to look at it versus a male, since the women are associated with the moon? I just was curious, like, why is it considered such a taboo to stare at the reflection of a moon in a liquid?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you study the language, and like if you study German, or it's gender-based, and if you study Navajo, it is too, and so certain things are going to be male or female. It has to do kind of with the power they carry, like if there's a male and a female rain, and the male rain is going to come down really, really hard, and the female rain is going to be more long-lasting and very gentle. That's just one example, but it's everything. There's a feeling of duality and harmony, and if you think of, I guess the best way I can explain is if you think of the Chinese, the yin and the yang, they're like two different forces that are come together into one, and so it's the same thing in Navajo. You need both to make a whole. And so one of the centers of Navajo thinking is a phrase called and we usually just abbreviate as SNBH, but that has to do with the whole cosmic order of the universe, and And so the male part comes first and then the female, but they keep going around in a circle. You need both of them to be whole. And so, like the women, like I said earlier, the women learn a lot of women's knowledge, the men learn men's knowledge. But because, they're like married or they're together in a family, the knowledge is shared. But definitely, it all is reflected in the language.
I would just say that Cherokee is not gender-based in that same way. In fact, there's no pronouns in Cherokee for he or she, which is one pronoun. There is a distinction between alive or not alive, but not he or she.
And depending on who you talk to in Navajo, they'll say everything's alive. Just name anything in this room that's not alive. And so you might say, metal. But then you go back to what makes the metal, and you can show it was alive. And then other people will say, oh yeah, that rock isn't alive. And so one time these scientists came out from the Navajo Nation. They went up to the top of a mountain with knowledge holders, and the knowledge holders will say everything's alive. And the scientists had a hard time wrapping their minds around that. But I that's a really interesting question. What's alive and what's not alive? And what is in people's mind when they define something as alive?
Again, I'm thinking about what I was indoctrinated with in science class, but for the Cherokee speakers, when they're trying to make that distinction for speaking Cherokee language, they say, if it has a heartbeat, it's alive. But at the same time, when they talk about the world and being outside with the plants and the animals and the rocks, there's very much a respect there and an acknowledgement of those things being in this universe and having energy and being deserving of our respect, as though they were alive like we are.
Well, another thing I've heard now has to do with the shadow. So when you're born, and the minute you're born, you have a shadow, and that's part of you all through your life. And when you die, your shadow goes with you. You don't have a shadow after you die. This is how they talk about it. So yeah, they do acknowledge something like living and not living too.
Thank you both very much for this, and I agree it's been mesmerizing. And Dr. Maryboy, I'm appreciative and curious about your conversations about knowledge holders and also having to navigate what gets shared and what does not get shared. And you started out by saying that what you're sharing has been vetted with the people that need to know. And I guess what my question is when we talk about science and traditional knowledges and the projects that you're working on with NASA, do you continue to navigate with elders or with knowledge holders about how to express what you express to wider publics, as far as who can know what they know?
That's a really good question. These have both been really good questions. There always is going to be, like in Navajo as Indian tribe, nobody's always going to agree on the same way of answering a question like that, but I'll give you a shot at it. Careful working with the traditional people, because we're coming from traditional families, and we're really careful about what we leave in what stays with Navajo and what gets out. And I told you earlier that my brother is the head of the Medicine Men Association. They're really excited over our book on Navajo astronomy, and they wrote us a letter and said it should be in every school, on Navajo Nation. So we have their support. Really, our focus is on young people and what they're going to need to succeed in today's world. And so we just try to give them all the tools we can. And so right now, for example, there's a lot of interest in maker fairs and maker kits and engineering kind of things that kids can put together and they'll run, or robotics and that kind of thing. And so we try to get them, we try to get NASA, and everything we're doing is getting supplies and resources out to those schools on the reservation, because they don't have access to this kind of resources like you do in a city, for example. But there's all kinds of other resources. So one thing is NASA is actually looking at some of these schools because these schools are totally self-sufficient. They're totally sustainable. They have wind power, they have solar power, they have drip irrigation. They are totally off the grid. They're investing in little mill-like things so they can grind the corn of the surrounding farmers. And one thing that's really exciting that this Star School is doing, which means service to all my relations, they have just invested in a bus that has filters in it, and they're going around to communities, and the communities are really small, going around to communities, testing the water in these wells that have been abandoned because they're toxic. And then they're able to filter the water so it's clear and healthy water now. This is amazing. And we're hoping that this will spread, all over the Navajo Nation and to other tribes, other rural communities too. But basically, we are concentrating on the young people, and most of the tribes want their young people to have science as part of their toolkit, And then there's this big thing about the pipeline, not in South Dakota, but the pipeline from a native community to a career as a scientist, and how many people can we get to come to, UNCA and become scientists. And then there's some pushback on the Navajo community sides because they say we don't want our kids to leave the community, go work somewhere else. We want them to have skills so they can stay home and work in the community. This is something that's a real concern, but now with technologies, there's a lot of ways that students can learn sciences and they can work in their own community. But this is why this is just one reason you don't see a lot of tribal people coming and majoring in science. And there's a lot of other reasons too, like, how are they being prepared in grade school? But there's such a feeling in the communities of, keeping your brightest people at home to help on problems in the community. So that's a really good question. We just try to navigate through all this the best we can. But like I said, our real focus is on the youth and how can we bring something to help their lives be better, help the community to be better. And then sharing information. This is a particularly strong contention in the Pacific Northwest because people have come into the different tribes, the Coast Salish tribes, and they want to know everything they can about the plants. And this is very sacred to those people, and they've been really burned by people coming in and taking their knowledge that they've shared, and then it appears in a book later. And then I remember like something out here is the golden seal was something Cherokees depended on as a healing herb. And when it started becoming aware that golden seal could heal so many things, people in North Carolina and different places would go out and just rip out whole areas of golden seal. So it started to become not really extinct, but something close to that. So there's reasons why I think the tribes are so particularly careful with what they let out. But on the other hand, there's a great growing group of young, and a lot of them are women, young Native scientists at University of Washington that are so proud of being scientists and so proud about coming from a tribe. I see them as the future, and I think they all have to work out how they're going to navigate, in these systems. It's real complex. It's a very good question.
I was interested in the story about NASA and the concerns about the moon. And so after they made the connection with you all, was there any conversation, or was there with the knowledge keepers that were concerned and had gone to the government? Was that addressed in any way, or?
Okay, I'll see if I can address it. I'm not going to answer it. That's another good question. No, I don't. I mean, they came to us, and there's some other groups working with Navajo. Everybody wants to work with Navajo, and they say every family has a mother or father, children, and an anthropologist. So there's a lot of people working with Navajo. But you know, these are kind of unanswerable. It's a done deal. They can't go back and patch the moon up. They can't go back and take those ashes off. It's a done deal. So how do you go forward? They've had us do a lot of professional development. We're just the tiniest part of NASA anyway. They have had us do a lot of professional development with some of their scientists. We've worked with some of their native astronauts a lot. They've provided resources to the universities out there to work with Navajo, and there's always like a summer camp for Navajo. They're trying to remedy it in the best way they know, but actually, like I say, it's a done deal. And maybe, and they funded us in a good way, which enables us to keep doing the work we're doing, which is, to us that's very beneficial because we're reaching a lot of students and different people. But as far as, who knows what's going to happen on Mars, there's a funny cartoon I saw somewhere where these two Indians are hiding behind a rock, and it's definitely, I saw this at Jet Propulsion Lab. What's that doing here? Anyway, two Indians are hiding behind a rock, and they have feathers on, and they're watching the spaceship come down, and these people in their moon suits get off, and one of them is just about to raise his hand and say hello, and the other one says, "Wait a minute, remember what they did the last time?" And they're talking about what happened on Earth. So there is that feeling. I don't want to be a NASA basher because they do help us to do the work we want to do, and we work with wonderful people. I mean, just great people, and nobody could be more of a catalyst for young people than John Harrington, the Chickasaw astronaut, and more thoughtful and taking, we got to work with these kids to design a patch that he took into space. That was really cool, and they were so excited. We all were excited because our patch went into space, and then we all got a copy of it. But I think they're doing the best they can. They're very open right now to suggestions of how to work better with schools, how to work better with tribes. If you ever want to continue this conversation, because we're right in the midst of it, and it depends on what administration there is and who's the head of NASA and all of this very, very political. They're just trying to survive, and because there's a great interest in missions, there's much more emphasis and funding right now for missions, like the Mars mission or different MMS mission. There's more funding for these than there is for education. And I consider this a real concern, and so do all the educators in NASA. Because if you have scientists and missions up here, and you have the general public down here, and nothing in between in the sense of education, that's not a good recipe for success. So I don't know, I can't really answer your question, but I can add to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd just like to encourage everybody to look at the websites from some of Nancy's projects, Sharing the Skies, Cosmic Serpent. I think the work is amazing. The planetarium show with the Navajo view of the cosmos is incredible, and looking at some of the Mayan knowledge of astronomy and star events. And this is something that is so fascinating to me, and I just think there is so much knowledge that Native people have and have had, and because of being keen observers of this world. I just think that is so valuable.
And when you mentioned Mayan, I remember one time Dave and I were invited to West Virginia, and we were their space grant for the year, I guess, or what, their humanities grant for the year. It was to bring us in. They brought a couple in from Guatemala, and we were supposed to plant corn in traditional ways. Okay, so the Guatemalan way is you took a chicken and you cut its head off and you put some of the blood on while you were planting. And so the West Virginia high school decided that might not be the best thing for the kids. So they took that part out of their planting. And, well, what was it really? Oh, and then I'll tell you one thing. Their corn grew better than our corn. They told us that later. But the interesting thing here was that when when they talked about their knowledge about corn planting, they could have, they could have been saying identically what Barbara said about what's under the ground and on the surface and up above and reflecting back and forth. And they told me something I never forgot. Like they said, we gave the corn to our neighbors to the north, and you know, anthropologists say the corn came up from the south, and I know it was really important for Cherokee too. And so many things they said were so similar to Cherokee and Salu and all of that. Well, but what they said was that as the corn came north, we didn't just teach people to put a hole in the ground and plant a seed. We taught them a whole culture and protocol that went with it, and that's how the knowledge came north, you know, to Cherokee. And in that time, I thought that was so fascinating to know that they still kept that knowledge of how the corn knowledge was transmitted. And there's so many things in Mayan, because I've had the fortune of going down there a couple of times. There's so much in Mayan ways of knowing that is very similar to Cherokee, and also to the Pueblos and Navajo too, but especially I think to Cherokee.